Good afternoon, Eastern Washington. This is Matt Shea, and welcome to Patriot Radio, broadcasting live from the capital of free Washington, Spokane Valley. Brought to you again by the Committee to Elect Matt Shea, Republican, and the legacy of Dr. Stan Monteith, bringing you the story behind the story and the news behind the news. It's not about right or left. It's about right and wrong. It's about us doing the hard work to implement freedom because our hope is not in man but in Jesus Christ. And we can't end in prayer. We must also move to action. And as Exodus 15:3 admonishes us, the Lord is a warrior, the Lord is his name, which brings up the question, are we warriors? Are we out doing the fivefold ministry talked about in Ephesians 4? I'm going to talk about that for just a second. This is going to challenge a lot of the notion of how things are today, but I want you to listen to what I am saying, okay? That the church today has become a pyramid structure with the pastor at the top. And pastors have thus borne a burden that I don't think that they were intended to bear. In fact, if you look about how many pastors fall a month, and you just look at it online. In fact, there's pastoralcareincorporated.com has a statistic. Over 1,500 pastors left the ministry every month last year. Now, some, Lifeway.com says 1,700 pastors leave the ministry every month. And why is that? It's because pastors are, and you can look this up online yourself, but think about how many that is a year, okay? Because it's the pastor at the top taking all the burden, they're burning out. They're leaving the ministry. But that's not the way the church was necessarily supposed to be set up. And that is why I say today, not Happy Halloween, I say Happy Reformation Day. Actually, 500 years, 1517, Martin Luther posted his 95 Theses to the Wittenberg church door. October 31st, 1517. Why on October 31st? Well, it's interesting. He was confronting two religious observances that promoted false saintliness. And indeed, there were some bad things that came from the Reformation, particularly the Catholic Protestant wars that followed, the horrific treatment of the Irish, of which I am descended. But there were some good things. The protest against the corruption within the Roman Catholic Church, the cleaning up, the rediscovery of the doctrine of justification, salvation by grace alone, through faith alone in Christ alone. That was a good thing for the church as a whole, Catholics and Protestants alike. But we have missed Ephesians 4:10 specifically. We have missed the idea of the fivefold ministry and the idea that the church was not supposed to be structured in the shape of a pyramid. It was supposed to be structured in the shape of a wall where you had apostles and prophets and teachers and evangelists and pastors. Now, if you go into Scripture and you actually just do a search on each one of those terms, you'll see that pastor comes up once. And if you look in the specific Greek, that's what is supposed to happen. Sometimes pastor is translated, it's not really the word pastor. You're talking about different terms in the Greek, and they have different meanings. But just follow me here for a second. If the church is a wall, and there's a crack in one part of the wall, the rest of the body can help patch that crack. If one part of the wall falls down in the ministry, the rest of the wall stays standing. The wall can hold and distribute the weight of the burden of ministry across a broader front. And there are some people that really get uncomfortable when you talk about the fivefold ministry, but I think that the statistics of 1,500 to 1,700 pastors leaving the ministry every month bears witness to the fact that the structure that we are under the impression with the current church is not working. And if we want to be warriors, we need to be part of that wall. And it's interesting that Ephesians 4 specifically says the purpose of that is to train, to equip the saints for the purpose of achieving maturity in the fullness of Christ Jesus. In other words, when we are together side by side, not one over the other, that we can help each other become more mature as Christians because we have to work in relationship. We can't be immature in our relationships to another. Put the burden on the pastor for everything. All the problems, all the phone calls, all the infighting, all the politics of church doesn't fall on one person. It falls across the fivefold ministry. And therefore, we have to become mature if we're going to operate as a body. Now, I'm going to talk more about this in some succeeding shows, but it's, I think, something we need to not just reject what I'm saying out of hand, okay? I think we need to take a serious look at this. Because candidly, people in the church today find it easier just to dump all that on the pastor because they don't have to worry about it themselves. I mean, pastors they get all the terrible phone calls about so-and-so and their marriage falling apart, or infidelity, or so-and-so and so-and-so in a tragedy of a child, or so-and-so and so-and-so dying, or so-and-so and so-and-so backbiting inside the church and trying to take the pastor down or disagreeing with a point that was preached about. If we're working together with the fivefold ministry, apostles, prophets, teachers, evangelists, and pastors, and we understand what the duty of each one of those is in the ministry, and we're a wall, we're going to be a lot stronger as a church. Because simply put, again, the top-down structure is not working. And because it's Reformation Day, I want to bring that up as an idea that we need to get back to that operation of the early church. Because they had to operate that way, because they didn't know if somebody was going to be arrested at one point or not and dragged off. The church had to still continue to function. One part of the wall falls down or is taken away, the church continued to function. And I really see that as an issue today. That we're missing what Ephesians 4 specifically says is the purpose of that. For the service of the body, to train and equip saints, but more importantly, to mature the church as a whole. And I think many of you out there in Patriot Radio Land would agree there is a lack of maturity among many in the church today. Squabbles and arguments and just ridiculous behavior. I've seen it. And we're better than that. We need to get back to these basic principles surrounding structure. Which brings me now to your daily intelligence briefing on the international front. And we're going to have General Paul Vallely on the show later. We had him pre-scheduled, and it seems like every time he comes on the show, there's a terror attack. Unfortunately, there is today breaking news just before the show. I want to get into this, what we know right now. 8 people dead. Looks like about 15 injured so far. Killer in New York City rammed his vehicle, looks like into pedestrians and bikers, or at least going down into the bike lane. and then began shooting, and apparently ran toward kids. In the video that is available, he shouted Allahu Akbar as he came out. Very clearly looks like a terror attack. Again, ISIS threatened Halloween attacks already. And we'll get General Vallely's thoughts on this, but once again, a terror attack in the United States of America. A lot of questions coming out of Las Vegas, that there have been well-established attacks, not just at the Mandalay Bay the same time, but also at the Bellagio and the Tropicana. There is something that happened there that they are not talking about. But now we have an Islamic terror attack again in New York. 8 people dead, 15 injured. There's probably going to be more coming in on this during the show. But these vehicle-borne attacks, we talked about this a year ago. These vehicle-borne attacks becoming the new normal, just horrific. And also, by the way, in a very restricted gun zone, okay? And I'm saying that before all of the other garbage comes forward that we keep hearing about gun control. Apparently this was near a school too, by the way. Just horrible. So thoughts and prayers with the families out there. And we need to come together as Americans and embrace the reality that we need to fight radical Islamic terror. We need to quit treating it with a politically correct agenda and approach and actually take this head on. And I hope that Donald Trump, on the heels of this 58 killed in Egypt by the Muslim Brotherhood, finally declares the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist organization. Also on the international front in the Middle East, Raqqa, the ISIS capital, has fallen, and we're going to probably see, again, like we've talked about, a dispersion of ISIS personnel throughout the world. Kurds have captured Syrian oil fields. They lost Kirkuk, apparently intentionally, to the Iraqi army. There's a tentative ceasefire in the Middle East right now between the Iraqis and the Kurds. Not a lot, again, in the mainstream media. It's just weird. Also in the Middle East, the Saudis going moderate. And interestingly enough, looking like they're going to take the first steps to becoming nuclear power. Understand what I just said, because the Iranians are threatening the United States bases over there with ballistic missiles. That just came out. And the Saudis are saying that they are, at least by action, not necessarily by words, are taking the first step toward becoming a nuclear power. This is where things are getting a little sketchy over there. But Saudi Arabia specifically, and this is according to Yahoo, has sent a request for information to international suppliers to build 2 nuclear power plants, first step toward a formal tender. You get the idea that because the Saudis have done this, they are going to go in that direction. It says right on the heels of Iran threatening U.S. bases. So once again, the Middle East, a tinderbox right now. We'll keep our eyes on that. North Korea threatens again, but, I mean, I don't even pay attention much to their threats anymore. But interestingly enough, the site of their nuclear tests may have collapsed back in early October. That may have been that earthquake, that weird earthquake that registered on the Richter scale after the test. So this is not the test earthquake, but this was a separate issue, and it looks like according to a report, that the site may have collapsed, killing 200 people, and this is on several news outlets. The United States has 3 aircraft carriers in the region as well. So, once again, things very tense in North Korea. We're going to talk to Major General Vallely today about that as well. The Catalonians continue to be defiant, but urging peaceful resistance to the Spanish government trying to sack the Catalonian government. They're not, obviously, abiding by that. There was a vote by the representatives of Catalonia to be independent. And as expected, Milan and Venice in northern Italy have voted 95% for autonomy. Now, that vote, though, was recognized by the government as legitimate. But not a lot is expected from that other than a quest to maybe take Milan and Venice more seriously, because that is the most productive part of Italy. Similar to Catalonia being the most productive part of Spain. Now, the history there in Catalonia is interesting. 1938, the Catalonians lost to the dictator Franco a battle and have since been working for autonomy. So this goes, this history of, defiance from Catalonia is very interesting. Now, I'm going to be posting a couple things. But one of them is interesting. It's a map of the European independence movement. And if you take a look at this, it is incredible. Dozens and dozens and dozens of movements throughout Europe. So this is going to continue, I think, into the near future, near being the next 50 years, these independence movements and this kind of reclaiming of their culture, heritage, and representation in government. Also on the international front, Venezuela, 2,400% inflation, missed 5 payments. Now, those payments have a grace period of 30 days. They did make their payment last week of almost $1 million. Actually, I think $841 million. They made the payment, okay? This Thursday, they have another payment due of $1 million or $1 billion, dollars as well. So all eyes are going to be on Venezuela to see if they indeed default, but they did avoid catastrophic default last week. They still have these 5 missed payments hanging out there, and they've got a $1 billion payment at the end of this week due. On the national front, debt forgiveness in Puerto Rico being eyed by the Trump administration. The interesting part about that debt forgiveness is it's $29 billion, and also interesting that the governor came out and said that their goal is to have power restored to 95% of Puerto Rico by December. You understand what that means? It's like 3 months without power. And that's only 95%, right? There's 5% that are still going to be without power for some time. So, again, a lesson to be prepared, but also I think a critical point that eventually these, like Illinois being bankrupt, although they can't say they're bankrupt, and then Puerto Rico being actually bankrupt, how are we going to bear this out for the American people across the board? Do we have the money to do that? And the answer is no. Also on the international front, an FBI bombshell coming out in the book All Out War, The Plot to Destroy Trump. Ed Klein, he's the former editor-in-chief of the New York Times Magazine. Okay, so we're not talking a conservative bastion, all right? But Ed Klein reveals to the public findings from an FBI investigation. This is an FBI field report that specifically documented a group of American leftist radicals from Oakland who traveled to Germany to join their German counterpart, Antifa, okay, anti-fascist action in Germany, and that evidence was gathered that these guys met with members of the radical Islamic terrorist ilk, talking like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, specifically Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, and that these Oakland group members met in Hamburg with the leader of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. So, all right, understand what this means. Okay, now it's coming from Clarion Project, a very good source on these issues, but specifically, this means that the FBI had a field report on ISIS collusion with members of the American left. Remember, we talked about this several months ago. Unbelievable. Which brings us now to November 4th, almost 100 years to the day of the Communist Revolution in 1917. Antifa is gearing up for violence. There have been reports of arrests of people that have been stockpiling guns in anticipation of November 4th. And these are people that are affiliated with Antifa. So the radical left getting ready, it looks like. Also on the national front, the JFK files. Very, very interesting stuff coming out of the JFK files. Wow. I want to highlight a couple things. One is, okay, there's one paragraph in one of the documents was released by the JFK file. I want to read this to you, okay? This is from a source. Okay, this document is back in, looks like 1964. It's an FBI memo. So January 31st, 1964. And here's what it says, quote, Potito, that's the source, said that the Surgeon General's report on the assassination stated the first bullet entered the president's throat below the Adam's apple, clearly showing that two persons were involved with the first shot being fired from the bridge across the parkway in front of the car. To further substantiate this, Potito said there was a bullet hole in the windshield of the car. So, wow. A bombshell that apparently corroborates the idea of two shooters. Also, more interestingly, also coming out, CIA agents were sent to find out if Adolf Hitler survived World War II and lived in Colombia until at least the 1950s, at which time he fled to Venice, or fled from Colombia to Argentina. And this is from The Sun, okay? This is a mainstream British press outlet citing these secret documents, formerly secret documents, and giving credence to some of the investigations that have happened in the History Channel special. Wow. So we're going to keep our eyes on some of this stuff. Very, very interesting as more of this comes out. But you can take a look at it on The Sun. They have the documents posted there as well. Also on the national front, fewest jobless claims since 1973. Trump administration doing a great job unwinding a lot of regulation, especially in the Bureau of Land Management. SPLC kicked out of the Department of Defense, another great victory, but this is an interesting one. So this whole Russian collusion thing is now flipped on the Clintons with the Uranium One scandal, and Trump is saying, hey, instead of indicting Manafort for something totally not related to the Trump campaign and done way before, why don't we focus on the Uranium One scandal and the Clinton involvement? And then I have to agree. I just find it reprehensible that the Clintons continue to seem to get away with darn near everything. So anyway, Trump, I think, doing the right thing, and maybe he has to have another special prosecutor if Mueller's not going to do it. You know, they try to make it out like, oh, we got Manafort, but really, they got him on something from a while in the past, if that's what they got him on at all. It didn't have anything to do with Trump campaign. It was just trying to smear it. So, anyway, take a look at this with the Clinton collusion with the Russians, and we're going to continue to report on this, and I hope Trump does continue down the road of holding them accountable. Also, on the regional front, the Bundy Ranch trial set to begin, and we'll have some updates on Thursday with that. Also on the local front, and I want to talk about the Hearst study that happened with water here in eastern Washington. BIAW put this out, $6.9 billion in lost economics revenue and lost economic productivity as a result of the Hearst decision. Again, once you control water, you control people. So the Republican caucus here in Washington State is holding strong to reverse the Supreme Court's overturning of 150 years of Western water law and the presumption that you aren't impacting water rights around you if you merely drill a well. Interesting as well, now the numbers that I have are $74 million in lost property value in Spokane County alone. Looks like over $340 million in lost property value across Washington State, showing the devastation of this decision. It is rumored in Olympia that we are going to be going back in December potentially to take on this Hearst decision for those of you that need an update. Lastly, on the local front, elections coming up, some investigations of some of the progressives here in Spokane Valley. These folks, some of them self-admitted socialists, coming out with an ad saying that the Spokane Valley City Council wants to raise taxes by 6%. Nothing could be further from the truth. They had a staff presentation that brought it out as an option, but it was quickly dismissed. And so this is kind of the socialists grasping at straws, trying to seem like they're, anti-tax increase, when in fact the Spokane Valley City Council has not just balanced budgets, not just done things with limited debt, but also not raised property taxes for 9 straight years. So, don't listen to that stuff. The socialists have to pretend that they're conservatives to try to get elected. And I think that should be the biggest lesson out of that. And the fact that there's a lot of vitriol coming from the socialists mean that they're losing. And we're seeing this across the country, so take heart in that and be encouraged. And that's the briefing. Remember, the antidote to dependency and socialism is to be a God-fearing, self-reliant, freedom-loving American. Thank you to everybody that's been praying for us. And make sure you go to Facebook/Patriot Radio US. Like the page, share it with your friends and family. And if you want to contribute, keep us on the air, you can go to voteshea.com. And we really appreciate everybody that has been supporting us. We raised well over $18,000 in the month of October. Thank you, everyone. Been amazing, the outpouring of support. Really appreciate that. Well, it is my pleasure to introduce my guest today, Major General Paul Vallely, retired, founder of Stand Up America, U.S., and one of the greatest living patriots that I know of, doing a lot of things that people don't hear about in the news, but really continuing to keep our country safe and to keep it pointed in the right direction. General Vallely, thanks very much for joining me on Patriot Radio today.
Well, hello, Matt. Great to be back on with you again. It's been a while.
It has been a while. And last time we had you on, there was a terror attack in Paris, and now there's one in New York. What are your thoughts on what's happening?
Well, I'm just preparing to do a TV show on that in about a half hour, but it appears it follows the trend line now, and that trend line among the jihadis, types like ISIS, Al-Qaeda trained, is to rent a vehicle and run people down versus necessarily, setting off an IED or a bomb or stabbing. And we've seen that in London, we've seen it in Berlin, in Marseille, and of course today in New York. And many of these jihadis, as they like to call themselves, have been recruited through the various mosques throughout Europe and even in the United States. And there's factual, of course, evidence of that. So this pattern is going to continue until we can basically root out and get the Middle East countries more involved in bringing in these imams who are teaching in the mosque and the recruiting efforts that are going on. A lot of this, as you remember, started out of Saudi Arabia and Medina and Mecca. So there's a whole history of this, of which we have now, but this is the war. It's a continuing war, and we're going to win it.
We are going to win it, absolutely. The Trump administration was talking about and toying with the idea of declaring the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist organization officially in regards specifically to some of their affiliate organizations here in the United States. Where is that at, and what is your sense about the Muslim Brotherhood involvement and the ISIS involvement in these terror attacks?
Well, it has to come about. We have factual proof of their involvement with radical Islam and spreading it out throughout the United States through organizations such as CARE, which is based in Virginia, that they, again, with the mosque, are trying to spread Sharia law and basically conquer the West and any democracy. So from that standpoint, the Trump administration is on it, but they've got to make these terrorist organizations and not permit them to organize and exist in the United States. Europe has to do the same thing.
I totally agree. How do you think we as citizens can help bring that about? Because it seems like pressure does sometimes get listened to, but it would seem like it should already happen.
Well, it should have. They should have never let it happen in Dearborn, Michigan, and Tampa, Florida. Citizens have to realize what we're up against, and they've got to stand up to these progressive liberal politicians, the mayors and governors, city council members that allow these mosques and so on. We're fighting not a religion here, an ideology. And when you look at the Quran, 80% of it is ideology. Only 20% is what you'd call of a spiritual, I would say, fundamental religion. And so if people don't realize that, they need to really be schooled in it, like I've been and many others.
It seems like when it's just a crystal clear issue when you dig into it. But I'm going to shift gears a little bit. What do you think from a law enforcement perspective, from a an FBI perspective, an intelligence perspective, should be done here in the United States to prevent, because these aren't really lone wolf attacks. I mean, there's always a tie to some of these jihadi terror networks. What do you think we can do from that perspective to stop some of these things that are happening almost on, it seems like, a weekly basis?
Well, a couple things. Number one, you have to understand what this plan is for the caliphate and Sharia law. You have to understand where they're coming from as far as ideological entities and organizations. Then, once they're identified, you have to make sure that they're neutralized and that they cannot practice under the cover of First Amendment. And that's what they're doing, freedom of religion. Next, you have to have a very good intelligence network in those areas, particularly where we know they're recruiting, and they could be then encouraged, to rent a vehicle and then attack innocent civilians on a street. So intelligence, information, very important part, and the people can be involved in this. Even the Muslims and the Arabs in this country who follow Islam need to be responsible and report these people. So there has to be incentives there of some kind for them to do that, and that they'll be protected. So this is a multifaceted battle plan that we need, and Europe is much worse. I was in Paris earlier this year, and I went into some of these no-go zones. And when you're in there, you'll see the vast majority of these young people, I say young, they're in the 20s and 30s. Those are the ones that are being recruited and radicalized, and a percentage of women as well. So it's not the older 50, 60, 70-year-old Muslims, Islamists, as we might call some of them, that are trying to recruit and basically take over the West. And when they follow the Quran to the nth degree, like the jihadis do, they're on a warpath. And if we don't realize that sooner or later, then we're going to have more and more attacks against innocent civilians.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the Middle East as a whole. You have done a tremendous amount of work in preventing a wider war there, specifically with the Russians. Can you talk to the listeners a little bit about the geopolitical picture of what is happening in the Middle East? I know that there's been a clash between the Iraqi army and the Kurds. Kurdish militias
Right.
have seized some of the Syrian oil fields. If you could kind of paint the picture of what's really happening on the ground there.
Well, I was in Moscow in March. I was fortunate enough to set up the meeting for the G20 meeting in June between Putin and President Trump. But while I was in Moscow at this Middle East conference, mostly attended by Middle East countries, they all agreed that ISIS and the caliphate would be done in Iraq and Syria by the end of the year. And by goodness, that's what's happened. Thanks to a new strategy and a new Department of Defense guidelines and a better strategy and tactics being used, we've participated in that along with the Russians. And, of course, you've had the Iranians over there, but you still have that situation with the Kurds between Iraq, Syria, and even Turkey. And so that's got to be worked out. Iran still wants to be the dominant hegemonic power in the Middle East. But now you have Russia dominating a portion of it with supporting Assad, and you have Turkey supporting a good percentage up in the northern part of Syria and Iraq. So this is to be played out yet, but I think we're half-formulated, and we'll pursue a much stronger strategy over there to really bring peace to that area as much as we can.
There's been a lot of speculation, a lot of talk about the United States should really take the Kurdish side, which does have clear implications with Turkey. What is your thought on that, and also your thought on how we should approach the Russians in that region?
Well, I think there is liaison going on. I know in a number of areas of joint combat air operations, we are coordinating with the Russians to a degree, but they've got to sit down over there somehow and work out what the future is going to be. Iran probably is the biggest nemesis to any peace over there, but yet you have the Russians, you have the Kurds that are very anti-Iranian. Then you have the Sunni-Shia battle going on, so that's another separate thing that's happening. But I've always have been for Kurds to have their own area up there and that they be independent, because that's where most of the stability has occurred, is in Kurdistan. The development up there, economic development, much more so than the remainder of Iraq. But I think the Kurds have a right to say we want to be independent, and I think that's the position we should take to support them.
There has been some speculation that a deal was cut because the Kurds gave up the oil fields surrounding Kirkuk and then got some oil fields in Syria. What's your take on that, if you can say? I don't want to put you in an awkward position.
Well, it's all back to oil and up there, and control of the oil fields in northern Syria and Iraq. Russia is very interested in oil field, which will go across the northern part of Syria and Iraq and give them a Mediterranean outlet at the town of Tartus on the Syrian coast. And Qatar has obligated itself in some way to pay for this. And that's what it's going to be all about now in the future. Who controls the oil fields? The Kurds, do they have theirs? The Iraqis has theirs, the Syrians. And then, of course, a lot of that has been flowing and was flowing by ISIS up through Turkey out to the ports for refining. So that's another thing that's got to be settled. And there's no solution right now.
All right, well, let's shift to the other side of the globe, North Korea. Some people not really taking this as a serious threat, that Kim is just full of bluster. He's not really going to do anything. There's now 3 aircraft carrier groups near there. What is your thought on that and the escalations in North Korea?
Well, first of all, they are a definite threat. They're a threat to South Korea, to Japan, to the area over there. They are still the godchild of China. China will be the important factor of getting them to start to look at a more peaceful future. But they are very heavily armed. They do have a missile capability and probably a limited nuclear capability at this time. They're working hand in hand with the Iranians on the Iranian nuclear development program. What I mean by that, when North Korea does a test, they always have Iranians there in North Korea. And vice versa, when there's a test going on of a missile or anything in Iran, North Korea is there. And so we realize that. So I think in the future negotiations over there with China, we're going to be very, very heavily pressing China. And that's what President Trump has done, and he's going to do it next week again when he visits Asia. So there is a solution over there, but the North Koreans are the ones that are initiating all this bluster and provocative action by firing missiles, for example, over Japan and over South Korea, and threatening over there to make even stronger attacks against those countries, and now, of course, attacks against the United States. So it's very serious, no doubt about it.
Do they have the capability to hit the U.S. mainland right now, in your opinion?
I think they do if they use what we call the Club K system, where basically they put the Shahab 3 on a container ship and they sail it offshore and they open up basically the hatches. And you can Google Club K system, which was developed by the Russians. The Iranians also have that capability. So that's more realistic than trying to fire it over Hawaii or interballistic, where they really put it into a high orbit. They don't have much of a capability of doing that now, but they do have a capability of launching it off a container ship.
So with that type of a threat, you have a great article on Stand Up America US in regards to the EMP threat by Dr. Pry. I've been following his work for a while. Can you describe what you think the reality of that EMP threat is for just your average everyday American?
Well, again, if you look at the ultimate threats against the United States, we know our grid system is very, very vulnerable. And we don't have it lead contained. More and more money is being spent on cyber terrorism, as you know. So when you link those two together and you do a low yield or a low altitude electromagnetic pulse attack, basically it freezes the computers with the power of that nuclear weapon. And so it basically shuts down everything from airplanes to your grid systems, automobiles, everything that's computer generated or computer supported. And so Russians know that, the Iranians know that, the North Koreans know that. And so people need to be more educated on what the EMP capability is, for sure.
Well, there have been also some cyber attacks that have been associated and attributed to North Korea in regards to the grid system as well. So it's not just an EMP threat.
That's correct. That's just one of the threats. But they put in a hydrogen bomb of any kind. They put in the kind of bombs that were used in World War II that can destroy cities and people. That's a different kind of warhead. And certainly they're co-developing that along with the EMP type of capability.
Now, you talked about China having and using North Korea for its own ends. What is China's culpability in all of this? And does China really control what Kim is doing, or is he kind of going rogue right now?
Well, I think he's going rogue to a degree, but I think China's certainly aware of everything that he does as a leader over there. China provides a great marketplace by going back across the borders for goods and services. So they're very, very aware, and that's why China is going to be the critical country that can make a complete reversal of what's happening in North Korea.
I want to bring us back to the United States for a little bit. There's been a lot going on with the Uranium One scandal, and then it kind of got covered up with the indictments yesterday. What is your thought? Yeah, what is your thought on this going on with the Clintons and Uranium One? I mean, what do you know that you can share with the listeners?
Well, I probably don't know any more than you do, Matt, other than that they were deeply involved in basically selling 20% of control of our uranium to Russia. So that's to me, that was treasonous to do. And I think the Clintons, the Obamas, the FBI to a degree who covered up much of this stuff, as well as the CIA under Obama, there's a lot that Mueller should be looking at. And there's no collusion or connection to the Trump campaign, I can tell you that. But there is collusion, which is not a crime, by the way, that has gone on with the sale of that uranium. And a lot of the things that even, not WikiLeaks, I think I'm talking about WikiLeaks, right? And a lot of things that was uncovered there, along with many of the emails that still haven't been released to the American people.
So we talk
a lot to come.
Yeah. A lot more to come. So we talked last time about, the Trump administration had been listening, and Trump had been listening to some of your ideas and how to deal with foreign policy and really strengthening American resolve overseas. If you could give us and give the listeners some insight into where you can, your dealings with the Trump administration and kind of your general perspective on how he is dealing with you and listening to people that are around him to protect America from all of these threats.
Well, I think there's a number of things. We're tightening up and doing a much better job in intelligence, particularly overseas with human intelligence. I think second, the emphasis on counter cyberterrorism is excellent. That's high up on President Trump's to-do list, and they're working that very successfully. Also, the rules of engagement have been changed drastically within the Department of Defense. That's why we've seen much more activity and much more successful type of operations, other than the one in Niger two weeks ago. But we do have a lot that my group has put together on providing what we call the lillypad strategy. Basically, we don't go in and occupy countries. We don't put all these big bases in. We hit the targets from the outside. We come back to home base. We've got the capability to hit any target anywhere in the world in 24 hours with the capability of our armed forces. But we don't need to fight these conventional wars as we have in the past, and to put all these bases in, which require a lot of logistic resupplies. Then they have to run convoys. Then they get attacked like we see in Afghanistan. So we're trying to transition that in the Pentagon at this time so that we have a new way to fight future wars. And you can actually Google this, Matt. It's called the lillypad strategy, Joint Strike Force Operations.
And for those of us that served on the ground, this is music, at least to my ears, and I know to many of the soldiers that listen to Patriot Radio today and former soldiers as well. Can you give just a final question about some insight with Trump and how he actually is operating? I mean, is he contemplative? Is it as chaotic as the media is making it out, or is he pretty deliberate in trying to do things the right way?
He's very deliberate. He reads a lot. He does listen to his advisors very carefully. He's had a mix of Obama supporters in the administration in the deep swamp there. He's gradually getting rid of them, but we counted up today 155 things that he's done very positively for the economy, deregulation, energy resource planning and development, just a whole number of things. And so I think that's important, but of course the media doesn't talk about that. They want to talk about Russian collusion and everything else, but he's very deliberate, and you can see almost everything that he's been criticized for on tweeting and things. He's been actually right on target in the vast majority of them. 95% of them probably of what he's put out has come true.
I agree. That's been my take, and I really appreciate the way that he is getting government out of the way and unwinding a lot of regulations, especially in Western land use. It's just been refreshing beyond belief.
Exactly, yeah. And that needs to be talked about a lot more and the new judges that he's being put in, over 60 judges now, but a lot more to go to get a lot of these liberal progressive judges out there who are putting politics before standing by the Constitution, for example.
Well, if you could, in the last couple minutes, a message to the young people that are listening to Patriot Radio today, and also if you could just tell them, hey, this is why we need to defend America. This is why America is important, and if you could plug Stand Up America as well.
Well, if everybody could tune into our website, our blog, which is standupamericaus.org, we post up there every day some great content based on intelligence that we've received overseas. And number one, donate and support Stand Up America. You'll get our newsletter, which we put out weekly, and it's very informative. And we would just encourage the young people, as I had, supporting individuals like you and Charlie Kirk at Turning Point and James O'Keefe at Project Veritas. But getting the people involved on campus and having the right to speak is very important. But we've got to get America all involved in this. We just can't go down this trap that has been set by the left-wing progressives in trying to change America for the worse, in my opinion.
Very well said, General Vallely. I just want to take the opportunity to thank you for all the things that you are doing that you don't get credit for. There are a lot of things that maybe 20 years from now people are going to know, but I want to take the opportunity to thank you, and thank you for being on Patriot Radio today.
Okay, Matt, you take care. Look forward to doing your show again.
All right. Lord bless. General Paul Vallely, Stand Up America US, and you can take a look at his website at standupamericaus.org, standupamericaus.org, a great patriot who has been at the forefront of a lot of things. And I want to go back over a couple things that he mentioned. The lillypad strategy, the idea that we do not have to have a huge footprint overseas. I'm just so heartened to hear that. I've been advocating something similar for a very long time based on some of the things that General Vallely told me a while back. And also, it's interesting that it kind of dovetails with some of the things Ron Paul was saying, that we need to reduce our footprint overseas. And now we have the technology where we can do that and do it with intentionality and do it in a manner that does not put our service members at risk. Also want to highlight this article on standupamericaus.org in regards to the electric grid being compromised. Now, it's not just from cyber attacks, but also from EMP. Now, Dr. Peter Pry, probably one of the foremost experts in the world on EMP, really takes those people to task that talk about the fact that EMP really isn't the threat everyone makes it out to be. And I want to read a couple things from this article to drive this point home. 1962, U.S. Starfish Prime was a high-altitude nuclear test, that generated an EMP field over the Hawaiian Islands. It caused widespread damage to electronic and electrical systems. Now, some people say the damage was minor, but there were 6 Russian high-altitude tests, and we've talked about Project K. And by the way, I'll talk about something else, kind of the interesting names between there. These 6 Russian high-altitude tests over Kazakhstan, where they destroyed electrical grids over an area larger than Western Europe. And that is fact. The Russians tested this more than we did. In fact, the Russians adopted technology knowing that EMP was probably how the war was going to be fought if there was a nuclear exchange between the United States and Russia. That's why they had vacuum tubes in their airplanes. They didn't have what we would consider higher tech today. They maintained low tech. 30 years of U.S. underground nuclear testing as well did tell us a lot about the EMP threat from the weapon yield and gamma ray output and other effects. In fact, these so-called super EMP weapons, where you have a low nuclear yield but a higher gamma ray output, is what a super EMP is and can be done without testing. Now, tests done by the EMP Commission, which was from 2001 to 2008, proved that modern semiconductor electronics are far more vulnerable to EMPs than 1950 and 60 era electronics. So, these EMP fields and the gamma ray output is where you kind of need to look at this and what the technology truly is, and it is a threat. And General Vallely mentioned something called Club K. Now, understand something. It's an interesting name because it was Project K. These 6 Russian high-altitude tests. Club K is a container missile system, and you can look at this. Take a look for yourself what it looks like and how small an actual boat is needed to do this. The answer is it's a very small boat from a naval perspective. So this Club K system, a container-launched missile, could have the effect of a massive power outage in the United States of America. And again, this article has the ranges for an EMP where a lot of the output would be from an EMP yield standpoint. In this article, it's Stand Up America US. And so, for example, if you had one over the middle of the United States of America, if the height of the burst was just 30 miles, okay, it would take out the equivalent of 6 states, about. If it was 120 miles, it would take out, and by the way, the time for a missile to get up to that height is not very long. And so if it's not detected immediately upon launch, it's almost impossible to hit it because most of our missile systems are predicated on the missile coming back down. It's about, at 120, is most of the United States, except for a good portion of the West Coast because of the Rocky Mountains. If it's 200 miles, it covers the entire United States of America. So you need to check out this article, and I'm glad that General Vallely brought that up. This is a real threat. There's a lot of science behind it that shows that it indeed is a threat. The North Koreans have said, and obviously they know, people are talking about this, that this is something they could do to the United States, and use the word EMP specifically. So take a look at that as well. And last but not least, this terror attack in New York, a radical Islamic terror attack, 8 dead, 15 injured. The suspect ran toward kids, was wounded, and is now in custody, it looks like. Just, again, an unbelievable thing. And how many of these is going to take? It's like it's almost every week, every other week. It's just crazy. We have to understand that this is a clear threat to America. And I think one of the best first steps is to declare the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist organization. Well, this is Matt Shea. Thank you once again for joining me on Patriot Radio today. Again, check out standupamericauS.org. May God bless all of you, and may He make this generation the greatest one.